We continue the Shir in Sichos HaRan. Simon Kuf Mem Gimel, chapter 143. Arizal says, referring to Tikuney HaRan, Simon Reish Samach Gimel. Rabbi Nachman speaks about the sickness called kadachas, which means a sickness of very high fever and intestinal ailment. Menel says this sickness of high fever is due, primarily due to overeating. Because when a person eats more than the regular amount, more than a regular normal human being does, it is no longer an act of a human being, it is an act of an animal. Person has abandoned his category of human and has become like an animal. Now, what actually happens then is that he has caused a defect in his own mentality. He is no longer acting like a human. He has the mentality of an animal. And this pigam, it's called defect, means a pigam in das, in seichel. This causes the sickness of kadachas. This is what the Arizal says in Tikuney Zohar. Here in the Sichos, there is a further elaboration on it. Rosenfeld brings a further statement by the Arizal on this. There are two kinds of food that is considered animal food. One is where the human food is more than is normal. Person overeats. Any kind of excessive eating is considered animal food, or an animal who is eating, or actual animal food being consumed by a human being. So this brings about a defect or harm mentally, and this mental harm by this wrong type of food can actually cause high fever. Now, to explain further, Arizal says that when a person has das, true wisdom, as a human being should have, he then has ahava and yira. He then has a true love for Hashem and fear of Hashem. We once explained that the three upper sfiros, Chachma, Bina, and Das, those three actually branch out to four. Chachma and Bina, these are called the three mental sfiros corresponding to the brain, three parts of the brain. Chachma and Bina, and then Das, the third part, that is divided into two, which become the first two of the next seven sfiros, the two top ones, which are Chesed and Din, Chesed and Gemura. This is why we have the three parts of the brain, the shin on the tefillin. You have a shin of 3 heads. The other side of the tefillin, you have a shin of 4 heads, showing that 3 parts of the brain become 4, branch out to 4. Now, the Chesed and Din, Chesed, kindness, stands for Ahava, love for Hashem. Din, harshness, stands for fear, a deep-seated fear for Hashem, or for something which is holy, a fear of that which a person should hold in awe. Now, these two, the two parts of Das, which means that when the Das, when the brain, when the seichel, the wisdom is in order, a person then has this ahava and yira of kedusha. But when a person's mind is affected, he acts like an animal does. What happens then is the das becomes affected. There is a pigam in the das, and then his das turns into also ahava and yira, love and fear, but not of kedusha. His love is for that which is tameh. He acquires a desire, a craving for that which is asur, that which is forbidden. Taivas, evil desires, and the yirah is for that which is also osur. It is osur, it is wrong for a person to fear, for example, to fear animals, to fear humans. A person should see to it that his fear is confined exclusively to Hashem. And as the Gemara says, that if a person really acted like a human should, pure Yiras Hashem, pure Yiras Shemayim, he would have to fear no one, because then everything in the world would fear him. Even a lion, the Gemara says, the king of beasts, who sees a human, who acts like a human, who has Yiras Shemayim, the lion would never attack that human, because in the eyes of that lion, he sees a human being, sees an Adam. It's only when the human being acts like an animal, then the lion sees an animal and does not fear him. This is called fear, Yiras Nefulos, the wrong type of fear. It means that there is a defect in the da'as and the seichel where the fear of kedusha should be. Therefore, his fear, his da'as is defective. And this, the Menachem says, we find in the posek, Umeisad ha'odam mina behema ayin. Umeisad ha'odam mina behema, the person, the human, is supposed to be superior to an animal. But ayin, there is no superiority of this human because of the fact that he is like an animal. However, that's when there is tumah. But when there is kedusha, ayin is also called keser, the crown above. Ayin not, that's the kedusha from above, from which all these spheres come. Chachma me ayin timotze. Chachma, the first sphere, chachma comes from ayin, from keser. So meisar ha'odam mina behema, the person is superior to a behema. Ayin, if he has the chachma that comes from keser, this chachma bina b'das, which gives him the das of kedusha, and then he then has the ahava and yira of kedusha. Menachem says of a person, if a person is chas v'sholem stricken with this sickness of kadachas, this high fever, this internal ailment, and knowing what caused it, what then is the cure for it? How is a person cured from this high fever? Medically, Menachem says we know that the cure for fever is to perspire. A person that perspires, who sweats out the fever, cools off, the fever goes down, it comes out through the pores in the form of perspiration. So, therefore, perspiration, sweat, is a sign, a good sign, of cure for the person who is ill with this high fever. Now, this zayah, in Hebrew zayah is sweat. The zayah can be induced. We're speaking now about fever that was caused because of sin, something mentally. Of course, there was a physical act. He overate, but the sin was that he acted like an animal. He defected his mind. So what would be the cure for this? Zayah, sweating. How? By a person perfecting, correcting his mind, adjusting it through simcha. The greatest cure for any ailment, for any kind of disease, any kind of sickness, is simcha. This is a fact medically. Therapeutically, there is nothing that can compare to a good frame of mind, a happy frame of mind for a person who is ill. Simcha is the cure for any kind of sickness, and especially for kadachas, for this high fever. A person who has the simcha, a true, pure simcha, this can cure him mentally. Once he is cured mentally, his das is cured, his ahava and yira are cured, he's no longer in the category of an animal, and this removes the fever. Therefore, the Menachem says, the word, we say at the end of the Hallel, Zeh hayom osa Hashem, nogila v'nismecha boi. This day we shall be happy and rejoice. Zeh Hayom Osa Hashem, the first letters of those 4 words make up the word Zayah, which is sweat, the cure for fever. In this case, what is this Zayah truly? What is this cure? By rejoicing, by being besimcha, be emes, this can cure the person from this fever, physically and spiritually. Can bring him back to the higher level, can elevate him back to the level of a normal human being who will serve Hashem with true ahava and yiras Hashem exclusively. Arizal says further, has been mentioned innumerable times, the main lesson that Arizal taught was hisbodedus. Hisbodedus means a person, aside from the regular tefillos, shachris, mincha, arvis, which are basic tefillos. Zvei Kodesh says shachris, mincha, and arvis make up the word Shema. Kriya Shema, which is the symbol of Amunah Hashem, and that is shown by a person's davening to Hashem. Aside from these basic 3, there is a mitzvah for a person to have his hisbodedus, which means a special time to be set aside by this person to speak to Hashem privately in his own words, to pour out his heart, to plead with Hashem for anything that he needs, seriously is in need of, especially the spiritual cure. He finds that he has been estranged from religion, estranged from mitzvahs. He does not perform mitzvahs as he should, then he should speak to Hashem privately. Plead before Hashem, and to continue this. Continue without a let-up, to insist, to be very stubborn, not to give in, not to surrender until he has what he wants. Hashem, take me back. I will not stop pleading with you, beseeching you, until you have agreed, till you have consented to take me back. If a person keeps that up, without a let-up, then he can be assured of victory over Hashem Kaviyachol. The Gemara says this is what Hashem wants. Hashem wants to be the victim. Hashem desires that a person should defeat Hashem Kaviyachol, to use that term. Hashem desires that Hashem says, come, attack me with your tefillos and win. I want you to win. But only if you are stubborn and you don't surrender before your final victory. Arizal says now that to make this tefillah more effective, it is most effective when hisbodedus is done out in the fields or the forest someplace. Especially out in the field, one is alone. Hisbodedus means to be alone in speaking to Hashem, alone out in the field where the grass grows. There, this is again referring to Likutei Maran, Tanina, second chelik, chapter 11, Teda Yudalef. Arizal explains there that when a person davens in a field where the grass grows, then he should know, be aware of the fact that every blade of grass is alive and also davens to Hashem. This is fact that anything alive, anything growing, recognizes, acknowledges the existence of Hashem and serves Hashem. When you hear the wind rustling through the leaves of the trees, this is actually tefillos being made by these leaves, by the trees. There's a special sheet of the song by all of creation. Everything created by Hashem speaks to Hashem, davens to Hashem. As we mentioned, for example, the sun. The fact that the sun revolves, what causes the sun to move in orbit? Only the fact that the sun davens to Hashem. And this tefillah is constant. If the sun would ever pause for a moment, for a second, the sun's movement would stop. This was the secret of Yeshua stopping the sun. Yeshua said to the sun, the battle of Givon, he said, Shemesh beGivon, don't. Sun and Givon, be silent. He did not say stop revolving. He said be silent, because the minute the sun is silent, it stops its movement. And the sun, of course, is inorganic. It doesn't grow. It's like a rock, earth. Yet, that too recognizes Hashem's existence and davens, surely so, vegetation which is alive. So every blade of grass davens to Hashem. Arizal says that imagine a person in the woods, in a field, when he davens, his tefillah rises up, and all the tefillahs of the grass around him join in his tefillah and go up together with his tefillah. How precious that tefillah and prayer is. The Sichos here, Arizal adds that this discussion took place when Arizal came back from the city of Lemberg. Now it is known the last 3 years of Arizal's life. Arizal was nostalgic at the age of 38 and a half. The last 3 years of his life, he had contracted the disease called tuberculosis, lung disease, which ultimately led to his astalkis, his passing. For those 3 years, he was very ill with this disease. He went to the city of Lemberg for treatment. Of course, it is stressed many times that Arizal did not go to the doctors to expect these doctors and professors to expect them to cure him. There were very deep, hidden motives involved. In fact, when Arizal came back, he then spoke very strongly against the entire medical profession forever afterwards, to know that the medical profession is very proficient as the helpers, the assistants of the Malach HaMaut, the angel of death. They are his best agents bringing about death, and they definitely cause more damage, more harm than good. So his going to visit to see these doctors was for some hidden reasons that are above us, but his visit to Lemberg, of course, was fruitful in other respects. He returned from Lemberg with this, he had a tuberculosis cough. He would go outside of the city limits where the air was much clearer, and traveling by coach, Rav Nosson and a few other Talmidim would go with Rabbi Nachman. And on the road, on the way, Rabbi Nachman would say words of Torah. Many of the chapters of Torah, the Chutei Maran, was said during those trips out of the city. On the road one time, this was the case. This Torah was said. Nosson tells that they were standing around the coach, listening to Rabbi Nachman, and suddenly they realized it was time to daven mincha. Rabbi Nachman said to them, look, observe all the grass around you. As you stand to daven mincha now, there will be a rush by an effort by every one of these blades of grass to press forward and to enter their tefillahs into yours, to have their tefillahs merge with your tefillahs, because in certain respects the tefillahs of a human being are better than the tefillahs of blades of grass. Although the tefillah of a blade of grass is purer, because there is no bad thoughts. The blade of grass has no other thoughts. He does not think about sports during the davening. He doesn't think about business. It is a pure tefillah. At the same time, that's exactly why it is not as precious as a tefillah of a human being, because a human being davens with effort. He has to put a lot of effort into his tefillah to keep it clear of any outside thoughts, which makes it worth that much more. So therefore, the tefillahs of these blades of grass, with this knowledge, they are aware of a tefillah of a human being right near them. They will attempt to have their tefillahs enter into and merge with his tefillah, making the tefillah that much more precious, that much more valuable in the eyes of heaven. That's when the Arizal mentioned this point, stressed the fact that his holiness is best, is most beneficial when it is done out of town in a field or forest. To add to this, one point, it's not brought here, but it's brought elsewhere, that the question was raised about going to his Hisbodedus at night. Menachem says that the real Hisbodedus, the best time is at night, because that's when there is a greater quiet. The world in general is more quiet then, is more silent, which is most appropriate for Hisbodedus. If not, especially the fields, then combining that the fields and the nighttime are much more conducive to having these tefillas answered. So the question was raised then, what about the danger of going out to a field, out of town or at night? Isn't it dangerous? Dangerous because of wild animals, possibly. Nowadays, of course, there are also wild animals that are much more dangerous. If you subtract 2 feet from a wild animal, you have a different type of vicious species of wild animal that's much worse than the other kind. In most cases are much more harmless. So would it be advisable for a person to go out to a field to have his Hisbodedus alone at night, especially as quiet as it is? That's when you begin to hear strange sounds. You hear certain wailing sounds. You can't tell whether it's a small animal or a large animal. You can't tell if it's close or distant. You can't tell if it's retreating or advancing, attacking. There's always that fear, the possibility of a person being harmed. Is it permissible for a person to go to a place of danger? Well, this is definitely fact. The Gemara says a person should never place himself in jeopardy. Menachem said it is true. Actually, the person must guard himself against any kind of physical danger. And it is very sinful to place himself in any kind of jeopardy or risk. Yet, when it comes to Hisbodedus, there is one case where a person should go without fear. Menachem stated very emphatically, going out to a forest at night for Hisbodedus. If I would have a son, Menachem said, I would, without the slightest hesitation, send my young son out alone to a field, to a forest to have Hisbodedus. So certain am I, danger prevalent, the case of Hisbodedus. And we've seen this. Of course, we do not advocate anybody going out today to Central Park at night, because there's not a question of a risk. There it's a case of a certainty. Nowadays, times have changed that sadly, that tragically, that it couldn't be done. Really cannot be done. I recall years back, not that far back, I'm not that old, but when going out to Prospect Park at night means about 1 o'clock in the morning, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, was a usual procedure without any question. There was one word that was not yet coined, that was not part of the lexicon, that wasn't in the dictionary, the word mugging. Even though a mug was a jar, some kind of you drink from a mug. The word mugging wasn't even thought of, wasn't even conceived yet. There was no problem, no fear of being attacked by anyone, just the very slight remote chance, ever so remote. And for that, of course, there was no fear in going out to the park at night, in the middle of the night, for Hisbodedus. There was a slight chance of being caught by a policeman and being interrogated as to what motive he could have for raising his voice, crying out without any logical reason. Then at Yisrael, though, where this custom of Hisbodedus is practiced to a much greater degree, Yerushalmi, there outside of the city, they have woods, forests, and there are a number of people who go out at night, middle of the night, for Hisbodedus. And I was there once with them, experienced what is meant by this possible fright or fear, because going out to the forest there, there are animals there, and there are some that could be possibly dangerous. This again is years ago. Nowadays, most of those places have been built up. They've become rural areas now. But at that time, it was still wildlife, and going out in the middle of the night and while having his bitterness, with a loud cry of oi emanating from a few at a distance of about 200-300 yards apart, anyone passing by would figure that there was some kind of emergency taking place or some strange occurrence. But more so for those there, when you're there, there are no lights, of course, in the forest, and you see two tiny lights approaching. Those two lights are the eyes of some kind of an animal whose size you cannot detect. Then when you hear a growl or some other kind of noise, it's not conducive to pacifying one's feelings. Despite this, despite those who have experienced this, and there were cases with animals that were dangerous, there is not one single case recorded in all these years of any individual person ever being harmed, being hurt during this period of his business, which was a full hour out in the forest, the outskirts of Yerushalmi. There's never been a case recorded yet of any person being harmed. So we can understand the Arizal's words that this is the most beneficial item possible. But again, we say, very sadly, it cannot be done here. The closest forest you can get to woods is to go out in your back porch where you have palms or plants with grass or flowers in them. And there you can daven, let the flower pot add its tefillah to your own. Of course, the main requirement being there's no one else present there at the time. That is true with spiders. For this, the next paragraph of Arizal continues by saying, in reference to spiders, the highest quality, let's say, the highest priority of spiders is to what should a person speak about? What should he ask Hashem for? How should he ask Hashem? Arizal says there is nothing greater in his spiders itself than a person first learning a chapter of a sefer. Let's say Arizal Sefer the Tikuney Zohar, learn a chapter there, which Arizal speaks about certain mitzvahs, certain midos, qualities, and then to convert that, to translate that learning, that Torah, into tefillah. To translate Torah into tefillah, that is the highest degree of spiders possible. This Arizal speaks about in the Tikuney Zohar Tanina, Torah Chaf Hey. R Nosson explains more about it in the Sichos. Arizal said that the ikar his spiders is to make a tefillah, to create a tefillah out of that which you learned. And for this, he spoke about it in general, about how wonderful it is to have tefillahs on Titus, and he spoke about it later on to the R Nosson, that hinted to the R Nosson, who had an unusual talent, one of the greatest of all time, talent in writing, as we can see by the R Nosson's writings. R Nosson should be the one to create a Tikuney tefillahs on the Tikuney Zohar. Tikuney Zohar Sefer, Nosson should write a Tikuney tefillahs, a sefer of tefillahs, of prayers about every Torah of Tikuney Zohar. This message was given to Nosson, hinted at by Rabbi Nachman. Nosson took this to heart, and he brought to light the Tikuney tefillahs, which is one of the greatest treasures in existence. It is said that a person who does not use the Tikuney tefillahs every day, that person will have to stand trial for it. Now that there exists a sefer Tikuney tefillahs, every person should indulge in it daily. The advantage is that you have a fulfillment of making teilis into tefillas. Translating tefillah, the Tikuney Tefillah is based on Arizal's teilis. It's a direct, heart-rending plea. The Rosenfeld's words are so eloquent, there's no match to them. They plead to Hashem to enable us, to aid us, to assist us, to fulfill the advice given by the Arizal about the mitzvahs of the Torah. Now, although it is good to use the Tikuney Tefillah, because it is tefillah on Torah, but it is best for a person to first learn the Torah, the Tikuney Manan, and then to have the tefillah said on it. This is what's meant by making Torah into tefillah, or making tefillah out of Torah. Arizal said, how important is this? How beneficial is it? How valuable is it? To make it a very clear, simple fact. Arizal said that there is kaviyacha, ishei, deyach, yichoyach, Hashem. We find the posek in the Torah that when a person brings a sacrifice offering of the Mizbeach, the sacrifice offering is burnt on the Mizbeach, and the aroma rises upwards. The smoke rises up, the aroma, and this is Hashem, a pleasant aroma for Hashem. It means that Kaviyachal, to use the term that Hashem, has pleasure out of the aroma of this korban. So of each korban there is Kaviyachal, pleasure to Hashem. Today, with the Shalma Parus Fosainu, with our lips, we bring korbanos. We do not have a Beis Hamikdash, we do not have a Mizbeach. We cannot bring sacrifices on the Mizbeach. We could offer as a sacrifice our words of Tefillah to Hashem. So our Tefillah today is like a korban, and this is a pleasant aroma to Hashem. Arizal said this pleasure to Hashem, since creation till the present day, speaking about the pleasures that Hashem had, there is nothing to match the pleasure, kaviyachol, that Hashem gets out of tefillahs that come from Torahs. How valuable is it to make tefillah out of Torah? It is that valuable that such pleasures, such satisfaction as there is given to heaven by this act is unmatched ever. Nothing can bring that much satisfaction to Hashem. So we can understand then how important it is. We say that his Hisbodedus is a top item that can help a person in general, elevate a person throughout. And of Hisbodedus itself, the most important degree of Hisbodedus is to convert Torah into tefillah. To first learn a chapter of Torah mitzadik emes, and then daven to Hashem to be zecher, to fulfill that Torah. And it also says further that every person has mesiras nefesh to a degree, which means sacrifice or self-sacrifice for the sake of Hashem. Each person sacrifices part of himself, some, all of themselves for Hashem. Real mesiras nefesh means those Jews who actually died, they gave their lives for the sake of their religion. And throughout the generations there have been untold numbers, millions of Jews who did this. But mesiras nefesh does not necessarily mean a person who dies. There are different forms of mesiras nefesh, and also this can be financially. A person who tears off of his meager earnings money to give to tzedakah. Person who gives his 10% in tzedakah basically, which is a requirement, and then adds to it by giving more money to tzedakah, that is mesiras nefesh, because he's depriving himself of money which he needs for the sake of living. Also, the person who spends money for mitzvahs. He wants to buy tefillin, tzitzis, mezuzahs, and he spends more money than normally. He could buy a cheaper pair, a cheaper kind. He spends money for a better kind. Person who buys better food. In general, you buy food that is kosher, it costs much more than unkosher food. Or when you buy glatt kosher food, it costs more than kosher food. Whatever reason, but the fact is, it is fact that it is much more expensive. This is Mesiras Nefesh. A person is sacrificing of himself for the sake of Hashem's mitzvahs. People who have children, they could send their children to free schools, but they send them to a yeshiva, where the tuition is very high. For the sake of the mitzvah of having his children learn Torah, he will go to the extent of depriving himself of buying a set of clothes, or of having meat every day, because he wants his child to learn Torah, to be brought up properly. This is Mesiras Nefesh. Depriving oneself, giving of oneself for the sake of Hashem, for the sake of mitzvahs. Arizal says now, there is another kind of Mesiras Nefesh. Giving of one's life through davening. A person who davens to Hashem, he davens with kavanah. He puts feeling into his davening. This means he puts his nefesh, his soul, his life into the words of davening. There's a posek the Gemara brings on this: Ki olecha ha'iragnu kol hayom. Hashem, for your sake we are killed every day. We die a death every day. And the Gemara says, what is this? This is tefillah. In tefillah we give our lives to you. We put our lives into our words. Every part of us is entered into the words we daven to Hashem. This is Mesiras Nefesh. We give our lives through davening to Hashem. What makes this so difficult? Because at times there is a terrific mental strain to contain one's mind, to harness the mind from wandering off, straying to different thoughts. A person who wants to daven with kavanah will find a lot of difficulty. There are a lot of manias, a lot of obstacles in the way. The mind has a tendency to wander off. You've got to keep pulling it back. You've got to hold a leash on it and keep pulling on that leash, not to allow the mind to wander off the middle of tefillah. It's so short a period of time. The whole Shemona Esrei, the whole davening takes only a few minutes. But those few minutes are so difficult to concentrate in that it is actual Mesiras Nefesh. A person to strain himself, as difficult as it is, as much effort as it takes, to put his whole body and mind and soul into that concentration, to see that it is one single pure thought throughout the tefillah. This is extremely difficult. This constitutes Mesiras Nefesh, about which the Torah says, Hashem, we die for your sake, by this concentration in tefillah. Now, what stops a person from succeeding in concentrating? There are manias, these obstacles that each person has, and the main mania, the biggest obstacle of all, Arizal says, is, if you want to know, is the manias hamayach, the obstacle that's created by your own mind. A person's own mind is the biggest obstacle of all, because the person begins to imagine, here I am standing before Hashem, I try to concentrate, I try to put all my effort into the davening, I do not succeed. Can it be that heaven is rejecting me, is pushing me away? Chas v'sholom. This is what a person imagines, and this means that he is then building up a monster in the form of a kasha, a question. How is this possible? A wrong and evil type of kasha. Because this is a kasha which is usr, it is forbidden, it is tamei. A person is never allowed to ask questions about chas v'sholom against Hashem. ask questions, why does Hashem do this to me? That is very sinful and very forbidden. A person in his mind builds up this kasha, this question, that am I being shunted? Am I being refused? Am I being rejected by heaven? Is my tefillah unwanted? And nothing is more false than it. Hashem wants, Hashem desires, in fact Hashem craves the tefillah of every single Jew. And Hashem listens intently to every Jew, with compassion, with pity, with kindness, regardless of how bad or how sinful that Jew is. Every single tefillah is listened to. When the mind begins to imagine things that are wrong, that are sinful, this is the greatest obstacle, because this is what really repels a person, drags a person down, chas v'shalom, takes him away from his closest to Hashem. So a person must remove that maniyah from his mayach, must remove that mental germ which attacks his brain and which does so much harm. It means to remove that kasha. Menachem says if a person has that kasha in his mind, if suddenly, through no will of his own, he cannot help himself but questions arise in his mind, questions in the form of chas v'shalom, doubts and faith, questions about Hashem, what should he do? This is good when a person has his bitterness. A person could then cry out loud. It is a scream to Hashem. Hashem, help me. Hashem, listen to me. The person cries out to Hashem aloud, then this dispels the doubts in his mind. This actually works. Dispels the doubts in his mind. It purifies the mind, removes the kasha. Menachem says, reveals, this is what's meant in the posek. Shema Hashem Kayli Ekra. Hashem, please listen, for my voice calls to you. Shema Hashem Kayli Ekra. The first letters of those four words make up the word kasha. The person has a kasha. He cries out to Hashem. These words of crying to Hashem will remove that kasha, but will clarify the doubt that's in his mind, will purify his mind, and will help him to daven with pure emunah, with pure faith. So Menachem stresses here, this agav is based on the Torah Likutei Manan Tanina, Torah Mem Vav, chapter 46. Menachem speaks about the union of Mesiras Nefesh. Menachem brings this posek to Mesiras Nefesh. This is Mesiras Nefesh. Person davening to Hashem and says, Hashem, I give you my life. I put my words before you. My words contain my soul and my life. And I pour out everything I have into these words. This is considered as valuable and as precious as a Jew who actually dies for his religion. In this case, though, a Jew does it every day. Hashem, every day we gladly die for your sake by davening to you with emunah, with purity, removing all kashas, dispelling all doubts, and imploring you, beseeching you to take us, bring us closer to you in purity and in kedusha. This is the ultimate in his bitterness, and the chlal in all tefillos. Menachem said that Menachem himself reached his great heights, a height that is too far for our mental conception, because Menachem's height went up above the highest of the heavens that we know of. But all tzaddikim of all time reached their madregas only through his bitterness. Therefore, the strong advice by the Menachem, every Jew should see to it that daily, without fail, he should have this bitterness for any period of time that he could. And with the bitterness, coupled with this pure faith, a person will surely succeed, becoming closer to Hashem. We should be zeichet to fulfill this together with other eitzes of Arizal, and be zeichet thereby too to see them Heda, the Gula Shleiman, Amen.
Amen.